Hello everyone, my name is Dan Simone and I am the gallery manager here at Valley Art Center, and we would like to welcome you to the virtual opening reception of our current exhibit, Intimate Regard. To start off, we'd like to thank a few people and organizations who've worked to make this exhibit possible. First, thanks to the Ohio Arts Council and Cuyahoga Arts and Culture for their ongoing support. Next, a huge thank you to VAC student and member Ann Dunning, who brought us the concept for this exhibit. Ann is a relative of Mr. Anliker's, and she introduced us to Dale Roberts. Mr. Roberts is an encaustic artist based near Philadelphia, and he was a student and friend of Mr. Anliker's. Thanks also to Dr. Kristen M. Jensen for curating the exhibit with Mr. Roberts. And finally, thank you to Nottingham Spirk Design Associates for sponsoring this exhibit. Now, before we get into the work, I'd like to talk a minute about a couple of the mediums Mr. Anliker used, as they aren't in popular use today. Many of the pieces you're going to see were done using casein and gouache. Now, casein is a milk-derived paint that has been utilized for centuries. It is quick drying and water soluble. Gouache is commonly referred to as opaque watercolor, and it can be used in very many of the same fashions as regular watercolor. Now I'm going to step forward a little bit and let you get a closer look at this statement as it was written by Dr. Jensen. You can pause right here if you need a couple of minutes to read this, or it is also going to be available on our website at gallery/current. Okay, we'll start our tour with this self-portrait. I'm going to move in on it and angle a little bit to lose some of that glare from the window behind me. You may recognize this piece. We use this as our marketing piece for this exhibit. The orientation and size of it was just perfect for our window banner, and I think it's a really striking portrait of the artist himself. Dale Roberts says that Roger would often remark on the necessity of finding ways to separate your work from that of other painters, whether through subject, handling, or composition. Among a myriad of choices, doing the predictable was unthinkable for the artist. In this example, the handmade aerialist's vest, narrow vertical format, placement of the head in the uppermost left, and questioning gaze all contribute to this unique self-portrait study. I agree. It's very nice. Next, we have Camouflage from 1943. This piece is done in gouache. Dale says, throughout Roger's oeuvre, we see a strongly developed aptitude for pattern and design, two skills used to wonderful effect in this very playful composition. The inventive color, graceful arabesques, and skillful manipulation of stylized form produce a unique early work. Next is an untitled nude, done in 1945, and this is done in gouache. Painting from life has long been a staple of the training of painters, and Roger was a lifelong advocate of the practice. While stationed in Biarritz, Roger participated in an intensive class taught by artists from American institutions. This nude emphasizes shape and contour over form and offers a wonderfully contemporary interpretation of the subject. Roger often admonished his students that if you took out the figure, the painting should still be interesting. Next, Memory of a Song, done 1944 to 1946, and this is gouache as well. This painting marked a departure from other early work with a strong surrealist quality. In this painting, Roger's interest in pattern, all-over composition, and inventive color are evident, along with a willingness to take risks. He once remarked that one of his favorite professors had stopped to ask what he was carrying as he brought this painting to another class. Upon looking at the work, the professor simply marked, "Well, now." And I said the same thing when we were unpacking this. I think this painting is wonderful. We're going to get a little bit closer look so you can see the diamond patterns that kind of go through the entire background of the composition. Next up, Look for the Night is Coming, 1946, and this is done in gouache. For some reason, this painting makes me think of Edgar Allan Poe stories. Next, Firefly, subtitled The Singing Grass in 1946, also gouache. Dale says, Roger always had a deep love of landscape on both the micro and macro levels. His astonishing design gifts and facility with the brush, expressed in swirling calligraphic lines, provide a kind of beautiful scrim for the mysteries of the night. Let me get in a little closer on this one as well. There's some great stuff happening in the details. So just to let you know, I am filming this on my phone. I apologize if it's a little wiggly and shaky. Like many, we weren't entirely prepared for this odd situation that we all find ourselves in, and we're just doing the best we can. Next up, Departing Rain, subtitle Rain on Euclid. This is 1946 and is also gouache. An early landscape with surrealistic overtones and an unusual palette, an example of the range of both subject and handling which was to characterize Roger's work through his lifetime. Next, Thoughts on Flight from 1948, gouache. There's a lot of very subtle texturing that's going on in this piece, and truly is a shame that you all can't be here to get up close to see it right now, but hopefully very soon. This exhibit will be here into May, so hopefully before then conditions will lift and we'll be able to welcome you all back in. Next up in our journey through intimate regard, portrait titled Mute Song. This is a portrait of Andy Warhol from 1949, and it's also done in gouache. Andy Warhol was a student at Carnegie Tech, now Carnegie Mellon, when Roger Anliker began teaching there in 1948. Warhol was not his student, but they were friendly, and Warhol signed the guest list for Anliker's first solo exhibition at Jacques Seligman Gallery in New York in 1950, where this piece was first exhibited. Next, another portrait, Kay Dorn from 1948, also gouache. Catherine Elizabeth Dorn Cass taught watercolor at the Cleveland Institute of Art between 1925 and 1961. She was famous for telling her students, if you think they are going to kill you in the war, better get to work to produce something as proof that it will have been a tragedy. Cass had a profound effect on Anliker and sponsored his application for the Guggenheim Fellowship in 1947. Bilbao Cliffs, painted between 1957 and 1964 in gouache. Bilbao Cliffs was begun while Anliker was abroad on his Guggenheim Fellowship and was completed in time for its inclusion in his 1960 solo exhibition in Pittsburgh. However, as with many paintings from the 1950s forward, Anliker would continue to work on the picture for 7 years. Here, as in Domino, nearby in the exhibit, he added a bits of sand to highlight the shimmering qualities of the landscape in sunlight. Let's get a closer look at that. As we said, this is in gouache. Gouache is really hard to work in and get very consistent color fields in, but Roger was pretty darn good at it. I also like all this spattering and stippling that he's done over top of the main image. It's a really interesting texture and really lends itself to the idea that these are sandy cliffs. And here is Domino, painted between 1957 and 1975. And this, again, is gouache. Here's an untitled piece from 1950. Those of you who know me may know that I have an affinity for creepy art. So I really like this one. It's just a little creepy. Just my style. We're going to get in there a little bit. Again, so you can see all the marvelous texture and everything that's all the layers of color and idea that have gone into this. We've got some fish here, very dark, and this wonderfully creepy face. It's my jam right there, I'm telling you. Next up, we have Uncertain Image from 1951. This piece is encaustic. Again, a little creepy, I'm digging it. There's a lot going on, a little bit of a portrait under plastic or ice or something, whatever you want to call it there. Here we have Remembering, 1952. This is casein and encaustic. Next, Regret, subtitled The Whisper, 1952. This again is casein and encaustic. In the early 1950s, Anliker revisited the ancient techniques of casein and encaustic, which is beeswax and pigment, to create a number of paintings which were meditations on emotional states and explorations of psychological responses to natural subjects, memories, and sensations, what he referred to as the mind's imagined music. Very cool. Next in this little grouping is Anguish, following the same themes. This is from 1954 and is casein and gouache. There's a lot happening here. All the little textures and swirls and jagged edges, and then these tiny little circles of texture. Quite a lot happening. This piece is The Constant Changing from 1954. It is encaustic. A little word about encaustic. It is pigment suspended in beeswax with certain mediums added to it. If you want a better explanation of it, as I have only really worked in encaustic once personally, you should definitely check out Dale Roberts' site. As mentioned before, he is an encaustic artist, and on his website he has a pretty deep and interesting description of encaustic, the mediums, the things that go, and various techniques that can go with it. Plus, his work is pretty darn spectacular, I must say so myself. This piece is Inner Blue from 1955, and this is casein and encaustic. One thing I do know about encaustic is that a lot of times artists will embed layers of other paint in between layers of the encaustic wax, and that's how they get these really kind of ghostly, pale tints to their colors. You may be, if you're familiar with Valley Arts Center, then you've probably seen Linda Meyer's encaustic work in our exhibits and our shops. And it's another excellent example of encaustic processes. Star Pool from 1955. This is gouache. That's a lot of gouache. This next piece is untitled, but it is subtitled as Sunflowers. It's done in 1956. It is also gouache, and according to our notes that were provided by Dale and Dr. Kristen, this is an unfinished piece. That's interesting. When you get up close to it, you can see the bare areas of paper. We're left to wonder if there was planned pigments to go in, if those were planned to remain bare, or what. But in either case, I think it's pretty cool as is. Next up, Biarritz Star Pool, 1956 to 1957. This is in gouache. A study of the reflection of sky, clouds, and sun in a tidal pool. Biarritz star pool dispenses almost entirely with solid form. Little swirls of seaweed provide the visual clue, tethering the image to the natural world. The painting is a kaleidoscope of color and pattern, of fluid forms that flicker and shift, assuming vivid solidity in the center before diffusing into pale washes at the edge of the paper. Next two pieces are pretty awesome in relation to each other. So we're going to zoom out a minute for that to let you appreciate that. We got two forms, one brightly colored, one very dim and dark, lying almost in relation to each other, gazing almost at each other. It's pretty neat. So the one at the top is Alone in Sunlight. This was done in 1956 and 1957, and it is gouache. The artist referred to this painting as an experiment with raw color, although the pulsing radiant sunlight of the French Riviera is really the star of the composition. Yeah. And at the bottom, Figure with Pools from 1956 and 1957. This one is ink in gouache. Next we see The Dried Anemone from 1958 to 1960. This is again encaustic. Sinuous yet brittle, forms of the dried anemone are bathed in the light of the moon and stars, an expression of light and vibrating color reminiscent of Van Gogh's famous Starry Night. I'm into it. I think this as well is one of my favorites. Really, there's really hard to pick a favorite out of this exhibit. He was a very, very gifted man. Next is Anemone Rain from 1957 to 1962. Casein and encaustic. I'll move in on this one a little bit. There's a lot of very cool textural things happening. A Death of Flowers, 1954, Casein. This cool ghostly figure and almost Victorian, I don't know, corset or armor transposed against this field of blue lily pad. Little hints of vegetation. Maybe this is a pool. Biarritz, 1957 to 1977. Gouache. Anliker once said that an artist is extravagant with time, a reference perhaps to the 20 years he devoted to this painting in comparison to the fleeting life of the flowers trapped in the basket and long crumbled to dust by the time he had finished. I'm going to get in on this one again. I just love the details that he's getting into on these leaves, on the handle of the basket. It's wrapped in this almost metallic riveting or something, I don't know. Reminds me of old punk rock jackets with their spikes. That's probably just ribbon. All of the texture here on this leaf. There's a lot going on these pieces, you guys. And again, hopefully we'll be able to open to the public soon and allow you all in to take your time in appreciating these pieces. After this, I will be posting regularly on the Instagram, on the Valley Arts Center Instagram, a still of the pieces from this exhibit. So also be another opportunity for you to zoom in and take a look one by one. Next, here, we're going to take a look at Capra Corona, worked on 1957 to 1982 in gouache. This one, again, getting a little bit of glare here, so I'm going to have to get at it from an angle, hopefully. You can get a better idea. This piece was a gift of John Nottingham, his addition to this exhibit, and a little bit more about John. John was the founding member of Nottingham Spirk, one of the leading innovation firms in the U.S. They have co-created over 1,250 patents, of which 95% have been commercialized, which are responsible for over $50 billion in combined sales. Why does that matter, you ask, to this exhibit? Well, one, they were a very generous sponsor to making this exhibit possible, so again, we thank them. Two, John Nottingham met his business partner, John Spirk, at the Cleveland Institute of Art on the very first day of registration. And Mr. John Nottingham attended Cleveland Institute of Art on the recommendation of his older cousin, Roger Anliker, whom he had always admired for his talent and creativity. So if it wasn't for Roger, who knows? Nottingham Spirk might not be a thing, but we're happy that they are. And again, we thank you guys. The final piece in the exhibit is Eye of the Dragonfly. 1958 to 1986, gouache. Eye of Dragonfly, like Capra Corona, was begun while Anliker was still teaching at Carnegie Tech and completed when he was a professor at Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. Nearly 30 years devoted to the development of this idea. What does it mean, this frieze of Noah's Ark, sirens and sailors, decorative objects from Anliker's collection, all, with the exception of the jars and agate, pixelated as though seen through an insect's eye. Art, Anliker would tell his students, is about the unique and the unnameable. Both the artist and the viewer must go down their own rabbit hole to figure out what that means. I don't know what it means. This is a beautiful piece. And there you have it, a virtual walkthrough through intimate regard, on display now at Valley Arts Center. Take it easy, everybody be safe, and we'll see you very, very soon. Thank you very much for your time.